Welcome back to Beyond the Uniform. I'm Justin Nassiri, and each week I interview military veterans about their civilian career. Today is episode number 100. I cannot believe we made it to 100 episodes. With me, I will be sharing my story today. So normally I interview veterans to hear about their civilian career, have them share advice for other veterans seeking to do the same. To commemorate the 100th episode, I thought I would share a little bit more about my story. I know you've gotten bits and pieces as I've talked to lots of different guests, but just really wanted to dedicate this time to just give a little bit of background on myself and share more about that. And I have to admit, it's super intimidating. I'm sitting here alone in my office after putting this off for so long. I have a lot of empathy for anyone I've interviewed. There's that sense of just wanting to, sit back and reflect and make sense of my civilian career till now. And just the realization that had I recorded this 6 months ago or 3 months ago, or probably 6 months from now and 3 months from now, I imagine the story would be slightly different, but that's the way it goes. So I will do my best to just do this as a tell-all. I'll try and be as candid as possible, answer frequent questions like boxers versus brief, Coke versus Pepsi, and the story of how I've embezzled millions through Beyond the Uniform as a front. Let's see. So I guess in terms of structure, what I was planning on talking through is just a little bit about my story with StoryBox, how I started a company, kind of my road from the military until now. Secondly, just Beyond the Uniform, giving context around how I got here, what I'm doing, where this all comes from, a little bit of behind the scenes. And then lastly, just some advice on things I've picked up from these interviews and just my own experience as well. In particular, talking about fundraising, startups, work-life balance, and a couple other things that might come up along the way. And I guess I would just say, to commemorate this 100th episode, there are so many people to thank. I appreciate, first of all, my wife has been extremely supportive of this as a side project. Nicole Schwegman has been incredible, just a continuous sounding board throughout this. Scott McKee, I would not have started this without his support and just kind of counsel on this. So many of you along the way, Dwayne Francis, David Lee, so many of the earlier guests I had on that was just really helped me get this started. So thank you for all of you who have listened, all of you who have just kind of sent me random emails and different ways of supporting. It really means a lot to me. So I guess I'll start with my time in the military. Was not the best experience at the Naval Academy. Enjoyed the last couple of years, didn't really love the first couple of years. I spent my time on submarines. I went the route, for those of you familiar, there's two types of subs, the smaller fast boats and the bigger boomers, and I went with the latter. I loved my time on submarines. I loved the responsibility, the leadership, the people. I loved almost everything about it. It was an incredible 5-year experience. I went in probably like many of the people I've had on the show. I kind of had the sense when I went to the Naval Academy I would just serve 5 years. And, towards the end, maybe like 3 or 4 years in, I volunteered just to make sure I had seen and gotten a taste of the full submarine life. I literally pulled in from one deployment. We were out for like 2.5 months. Literally pulled in, hopped on a flight. I was on the USS Alaska for most of my time. Joined the crew of the USS Chicago and Hawaii. Went out with them for 4 or 6 weeks, probably maybe 7 or 8 weeks. Saw what the fast boat life was like. Came back, flew home, and literally got back just in time to go out for another deployment on boomers. And after doing that, thought I had a good sense of both sides of submarines. Really, really liked the fast boat life. But ultimately for me, it came more down to family. And just as I thought of having a family one day, didn't want to have these constant deployments be part of our family narrative. And so that was the driving force for my getting out of the Navy. Is terms of what I did afterwards. So I went directly to business school afterwards, which I think worked well for me. I'll talk about that. I get the question a lot from people considering business school, and I don't know, honestly, if I'd spent 7 to 10 years in the military, I don't know. There's just a big opportunity cost in terms of time and money. So it really worked well for me. Literally, my thinking was as simple as I liked the management piece of the military. I didn't want to do the out at sea with no connection to my family anymore. And so my decision was literally like, I don't know what people do in the civilian sector that manage people, but I imagine it has something to do with business, and therefore I'll go to business school and figure that out. So not the most robust thinking. I wish I had a resource like Beyond the Uniform at the time, just to even understand and comprehend all the different possibilities out there. But that was what business school was like for me. So in terms of business school, when I applied, I applied to my quick take on business school. I think that it's really worthwhile to go to a top 10 program. Business schools are business or MBA is general enough. If you go to a school lower than that, I think it's still great, but I'm not sure how much businesses value that. Just personal bias. I could be wrong on that. But I had applied to a bunch of different schools and ended up going to Stanford and loved that. I know a lot of my guests have talked about MBAs before, so I'm just going to be very brief. Stanford for me was a life-changing experience. I just loved the people. I loved the culture. I loved the exposure to not just the career side, but just so many different lifestyles, so many different points of view, so many different backgrounds. I loved the small, tight-knit community that Stanford's known for. It very much coincided with my experience on submarines, which was a tight-knit, familial aspect. It might not be for you if you don't like that tight-knit, kind of incestuous feeling at times, but I just loved that I had 360 classmates, got to know them all, and it was such a vivid way for me to get to know different backgrounds. It was like learning a different language. The first year, learning about investment banking, which I thought at the time was a teller at a bank. I didn't even realize this huge, massive industry. But I would just have coffee and lunch with different classmates and slowly get to know what different career possibilities there are, what different industries, what different functional roles. In terms of getting in, I wish I'd known about service to school at the time. I kind of did that on my own. For every school I applied to, I reached out to the Veteran Club. They were great at connecting me to a current student. Kenji Jovig was the one I was connected with at Stanford, and I honestly don't believe I would have gotten in without his help. He was just very helpful in advising me and just giving me pointers on my essays. Just in terms of regrets, for those of you that are going through an education experience, I think this applies to anything. I wish for myself I had had more confidence when I was going through my MBA experience. I kind of adopted this, just this feeling, like a lot of people told me, like, well, you don't have business experience, and I just adopted this mindset that I didn't know, that I was behind my classmates. And that's very true in a lot of regards, obviously on the business side, but I really did discount the incredible life and leadership experience that I think is close to impossible to replicate outside of the military. And so I wish I'd had a little bit more boldness in realizing the depth that I brought to the table. A second thing was I really wish I'd had 2 to 3 months of actual working experience prior to business school. Even as little as 2 to 3 months, I think would have given me a huge depth of understanding that I did not have going in business school. I had worked on random jobs like at my dad's company in high school, not really enough to give me a sense of what it's like to work in an office, to get some of the vernacular, just to get a feel for what normal office life is like. And for me, a contrast to the Naval Academy, business school, and just a civilian college experience was like, wow, all I had to base it on before was movies, and then being in the actual at a business school or in a grad school experience gave me a little bit of a feel for what life would have been like at a normal college. I feel the same way about those, even just a short amount of time as 2 to 3 months would have given me a lot of understanding that would have helped me in business school. And then lastly, I really wish I would have. I did not go into business school thinking I would do entrepreneurship. I thought I would do consulting afterwards. But I wish I had adopted a mindset that I was going to start a company after graduation. The reason why I would recommend this is I think that it forces you to extract more value from classrooms experiences. For me, a lot of the classes would feel academic or theoretical in nature, but my friends who were working on a side business, every class, it just seemed like they gleaned more from it. They thought more about how they could apply a marketing concept to their idea, how they could apply accounting to their idea. And my sense is I could have gotten a little bit more out of the academic environment if I took that approach. I think that's it on business school. So for me, I went to business school the whole time. I think there's a common path where a lot of military veterans will go to business school and then go into consulting. And I think that that's a good route. It really rounds out your theoretical academic experience in business school with the more practical experience of lots of diverse experience within consulting. Getting to know different industries, functional roles, building up those muscles, and then after a couple of years, doubling down on a vertical or functional role. So my story was, most of my second year, I was very interested in search funds. And I've had one guest on the show to talk about that. It's basically a 1 or 2 person private equity shop where you are looking for a small mom and pop company to buy. You raise money to buy that company after a period of maybe a year or 2 searching for it. And then you go often to like the middle of nowhere to really grow it up to the next level. And I just thought with my military experience, with operational background, as well as a willingness to kind of live wherever as long as I had access to a cell phone, I thought that put me well qualified for search funds. I wasn't able to find a suitable partner. I think it was important for me, if I was going to do that, to find someone with a more traditional business background, which in retrospect I think was spot on. And so I ultimately didn't do the search fund route. Instead, I was fortunate to get a consulting role at a company called McKinsey. I would consider them, obviously biased, the best consulting company in the world. I had an offer to go work at their New York office. And so I accepted that offer, and we'll come back to that. But, the offer is incredible. I'm sure it's gone up since then, but just for context, trying to be as candid as possible, the offer was for about $180,000 annual salary, which for me, coming from the military, was mind-boggling, just mind-blowing. And the people at McKinsey are unreal, just incredibly intelligent, diverse skill sets, just probably the smartest group of people I've ever worked with was during that internship. So what happened was, this was the end of 2009, and the economy kind of fell apart. I was hoping to start in July. I was very eager to get back to the workforce. So I was hoping to start in July after I graduated in May. And my start date was actually pushed back till February of the following year. So I had an enormous amount of time, almost a full year to kill. It wasn't a big deal. They give you I had a $30,000 bonus, so I had plenty of money to live off of, but didn't want to be idle. And so I was on a trip to Alaska. Two friends of mine, we flew to the middle of nowhere in Alaska and hiked for 2 weeks. It was incredible. But John Finnick, who I've had on the show, John Finnick was an Air Force grad who was a classmate from business school who was with me. And I was just debating what to do with those 12 months, or nearly 12 months. And I had thought of going to a company and working in a sales role. I had thought of traveling a little bit. And I had this entrepreneurial itch. I thought of starting a company as well. And the advice that really tilted me over to doing this was, John told me on this hike, he said, Justin, if you spend $10,000 and 6 months of your life working on a startup, and all you get out of it is a story you tell over a beer, it's worth it. And I think that's a very simplistic lens to look through things. I think it was spot on, and that was just enough to tilt me off just nudge me off the cliff of entrepreneurship. So I got back on July 1st I think like July 3rd or maybe back July 5th, July 7th incorporated the very first iteration of my company. Was called The One About, and that started me on this 8-year entrepreneurial journey. So just to give you a sense of where some ideas come from, I had taken a class with 3 friends at business school. It's called Formation, I believe it's called Formation of New Ventures. And basically it's a 2-semester class where in teams of 2 to 7 people, you come up with a business idea. And the approach that our team took that I really liked was, rather than starting with an idea like many of the people in the class did, we took the full first semester to find the idea. And we would sit around in a room once a week. We had a whiteboard, and we would all throw out different ideas for businesses that we thought might be worth looking at. And at the end of maybe an hour of doing this, we'd have a list on the whiteboard, 20, 40 ideas. And we'd just divvy them up, just the ones we were most excited about. And either in groups of 2 or individually, we were each assigned a different idea. So like one of the ideas was trying to improve on hospital waiting times with some sort of app. And so I went over to Stanford Hospital and asked a bunch of doctors questions. We'll get into kind of this design school thinking approach, but we just bat around ideas and learned that these doctors were smart. They'd tried a lot of the ideas we had, so it came back and say, hey, this idea doesn't work, but maybe this idea. And we would literally expand and shrink, expand, contract, come up with more ideas, eliminate more ideas. And at the end of the first semester, we ended up with an idea that we had kicked the tires on that we liked. And the original idea was called Tree Ring Epics, which is an awful name. But the thought was, it was basically a precursor by a couple years to what would become Facebook timelines. And the thought was a passion of ours to preserve life memories. And just thinking that, you could have a means digitally where people could contribute to someone's life stories, maybe photos of ticket stubs, maybe sharing a story by video, but really trying to capture the essence of who someone was. And the driving impetus behind this idea was we wanted to create a platform so that our future children and grandchildren would be able to know our parents and grandparents. And so when I came back from Alaska, that was the idea I started with, was how do I do that? And so after a couple months, I started to realize the idea was just way too big. It was too unmanageable for me. But the piece of it that just splintered off was this insight that video is such a powerful way to capture someone's memory. If I want my dad to tell a story, he could write it down, I could get the audio, I could take some photos. But when it comes to really preserving his memory, nothing matches video to capture his gestures, his voice, his intonation, just everything that makes him who he is. And so that was the piece that survived. So maybe a month or 2 into my entrepreneurial journey, decided to kind of pursue this. And the idea shifted to capturing people's just stories on video. And, fast forward a little ways ahead, I hired some developers on a third-party platform I'll talk about in a little bit, hired them to build it, got a couple hundred users, started to get data, started selling DVDs where I would created this program where, let's say for a birthday party, you could have 20, 30 friends come and share stories and piece it together with this software and put it on a DVD, and started doing this around causes, did some around military causes, had people sharing messages of support for the troops. And around, I guess November, decided, hey, I'm just going to continue this learning process, and I'm going to actually try and raise money for this. And so I started reaching out to a lot of angel investors and met with 40 or 50 of them. And about that time was just around Christmas, and something really shifted in me. And that was just this epiphany that what I was doing, I really loved. I loved startups. I loved creating something new. I loved the passion that I was living in my professional life. So I went back to Stanford. I went to their career counseling office, and I told them, I said, look, I know this reflects poorly on you as an organization. I know I'll probably be back begging for a job in a couple of weeks, but I'm going to turn down my offer from McKinsey because I know that I either want to do this startup or I want to join another early stage startup. And that was really tough for me. I talked to a lot of other veterans because this thought of reneging on an offer I just felt like was so opposed to the values I held from the military, to honoring a commitment, to having my word being my bond. And I'm really grateful for Roy Gilbert and a few other veterans who were, had gone the path before me that just said, it's not a big deal. They're going to replace you very easily, and do what's right for you. That's what's most important. And I'm very grateful because at the time it was a very difficult decision. So I turned down the offer from McKinsey. They told me I had 30 days to pay them back that $30,000, which was very painful because I'd used about $9,000 of it to start this business and some of it to live off of. And but turned them down, and about 3 weeks later, unexpectedly got an offer for funding for about $350,000, which was just incredible. It was unbelievable. And I'll just kind of abbreviate the rest of this story, but from there I brought on a technical co-founder. I was able to bring on the first couple employees. Although I had money to pay myself, I probably could have paid myself $80,000 or $90,000 in salary. I paid myself just $50,000 for that first year because then the other people I was able to hire, I hired at that rate, and it really kept our operating costs low. And from there grew. Oh, one other kind of pivot along this way is when it was just me and this first employee I'd brought on. I was literally just, feeling out just other uses of our technology. And I knew, even when I pitched in to raise money, I knew there was a potential, though I thought it was 3 years out, to do videos for businesses, not for consumers. But I just wasn't interested in that angle. But I had set up a call with a senior director of marketing at eHarmony. And at the end of this call, this person from eHarmony said, look, we have a $100 million marketing budget. There's 5 different ways we could use your technology. This is great. And I literally hung up the phone and turned to the other guy with me and just said, look, the consumer portion of our business is dead. This is where we need to go. This is where the opportunity is. And so from there, shifted from the One About, which was consumer video, to Video Genie, which was video testimonials and video contests. And I just think it's interesting. There's so many pivots involved in businesses. Several that I missed, I was too late to, but that was one that was pretty big for us. So pivoted to Video Genie, started growing the team. We got picked up by TechCrunch Disrupt. We went to New York. We launched there. That was incredible to have this platform and to be just one of 20 companies to be launching there. I used that momentum to sign some deals. I signed a over $100,000 contract with Intuit, which was amazing in retrospect because I had nothing to show for our technology. And started gaining corporate clients. Started to work with Budweiser and Disney, and that was just such a cool milestone, to have those brands that my parents and grandparents would actually recognize. I think all along they kind of, it's interesting the thought of telling my parents that I had turned down this incredible offer with McKinsey to do a startup. It felt like I was telling them I was going to become, a space marine fighting aliens. It just seemed so outlandish. And having those companies kind of increased my street cred in a way. But also, I know that my family recognized the passion where it would be 9 or 10 o'clock at night on a Friday. I'd still be in the office and I was loving it. It was just such an exhilarating ride. And I think that that's one aspect that they did understand. Raised shortly after that, grew to a team of about 5, had some good metrics, and so went out and raised a round of just over $2 million. And from there, we'll get into this, but just a roller coaster. We grew to 18 people. We shrunk to 4. We grew to 8. We just kind of went up and down in headcount and just learning and making mistakes. And the honeymoon period of startups kind of wore off, and the reality of just more felt more like trench warfare than anything else. Really, really started to take its toll. And over the years, just really fell out of love with Video Genie, which ultimately became StoryBox, what we are now. And one other milestone I just wanted to share is close by one of the first times I thought of just shutting down and quitting, the first of hundreds of those times. Met with another entrepreneur who had raised $200 million, had grown his company to 300 people, was very successful. And after just pouring out my heart about just the emotional wreckage that I felt like of having raised a team of people, told them we would change the world, and then feeling like I was not able to fulfill that promise, feeling like I was a bad manager, having many quit, having to be laid off, almost running out of money, just pouring out my heart and soul for like 45 minutes. And at the end of that, he was just like, and what's your point? He's like, look, in the first 5 years of my company, I grew and shrunk 20 times. Our revenue went from nothing to millions multiple times. He's like, this is what you've signed up for. And I think that was enough to shock me out of, I'd been in that Instagram mode where every photo looks amazing. Everyone looks like they're having the time of their life. And I kind of bought into this vision of startups that wasn't really true for me, at least. And I wrote an essay on this. I'll put this on the in the show notes, but that really sums up my feelings, where I think a lot of entrepreneurs, myself included, can become wrapped up in what we think startups are and become disillusioned and kind of expect to be instant successes, when the truth is most companies just go through the crucible. They just go through just periods of intense growth and loss and learning and failure, and it's public and it's messy and it's embarrassing and you get scars and wounds, but that's just what this is. And if you go in expecting to be the next Instagram, expecting that in a year you'll be valued at $1 billion, that's just so rare. And I think it sets you up for this false expectation that for me really became soul crushing. But once I got rid of that expectation, really changed my mindset to keep on going. So last thing I'll say is that, where we're at right now, we're now known as StoryBox. We're built on the premise that people trust each other more than anything else. And so what we do is we help companies turn their customers into brand ambassadors. As an example, if a customer takes a photo wearing a Patagonia jacket, they post it on Instagram, our software will find that photo, we'll put it on Patagonia's website, we'll do it in a way that drives sales, that drives traffic, we'll integrate with emails, with ads, all sorts of different things. We do a lot of contests around this user-generated content. We've worked with over 25 Fortune 500 companies, raised over $3 million in funding, and generated millions and millions of dollars in revenue. So very grateful for the road here. So that's kind of the very quick rundown on my entrepreneurial journey. I wanted to just kind of tease out some lessons learned here, and maybe just kind of put a couple pieces of advice here. So the first thing that I like to talk about the emotional aspect of entrepreneurship. I don't think that the entrepreneurial community talks candidly about this enough. I think that's a disservice to future generations of entrepreneurs. I think it's much better, though embarrassing, to talk about mistakes learned and just honestly assess the emotional roller coaster that's startup life. So a couple things I just took notes on earlier. FaceTime with myself. The very early days, the first year of my startup when it was just me, I would be working like legitimately 7 days a week, 18-hour days, and it was very, very difficult for me not to be working. Not just because there was always something to do, but a guilt, an expectation, the perception that startups work 24/7. And Shutterfly, there's a great article I'll try and find and put in the show notes talking about when they, the first years where they were doing 18-hour work days, 6 of those hours every day was wasted, where they were working on the lowest priority items. It didn't matter. Deep Work, which I'll put a link to in the notes, I do a review of this book. It talks about forcing yourself to work in constraints and giving yourself the room to rejuvenate and how vital that is to creativity. I wish I had done that. I really did some damage to myself during that year, gained probably 20 pounds, was very unhealthy. I'm sure stifling my own creativity through this incessant need to work. And there would be times where literally I was just so fried and I'm sitting in front of my computer, but I would not let myself take a break because, damn it, startups work 24/7 and I'm going to do that. And it was so stupid to not give myself more of a break. Another point I just wanted to point out for startups, the importance of rapid iteration and outsourcing. This I borrowed from the Stanford Design School, this thought they would do 5-minute prototypes, which was literally like, look, design a cup of noodle in 5 minutes. And the point was 2 things. First of all, just to quickly come up with an idea that's tangible, that you could share with people and get real feedback. And second of all, have a low enough resolution version prototype where you're not emotionally committed. If you work on something for 6 months, if you get feedback that it's a completely wrong idea, you're not likely going to listen to that feedback. You're too married to this. So by doing these 5-minute prototypes, it really, really forces you just to do the bare minimum to show the concept. A lot of what I would do in the early days of StoryBox, I would go to like Walmart and I'd wear, I'd be overtly a student. I'd wear like a Stanford hat. I'd wear a name tag. Have a little clipboard, and I'd just go around and say, hey, can I have 3 minutes to just ask you questions? And I'd have a mock-up of the website, or I'd ask them questions about how they might use it. And that's so important to get real-world feedback, not just in your own head and in your own bubble, but starting to get a sense for how real people might respond to your idea. On the outsourcing side, when I first created Video Genie, I used a company called Rent-A-Coder. Now I use Upwork a lot. Why these sites, there's a dozen of them, but why these sites are great for non-technical people is it allows you very inexpensively to build the minimum viable product, just the bare minimum you need, stripped of all bells and whistles to build and launch a product. So, for instance, for me, I used PowerPoint to mock up the website. There's a great tool called Balsamic that's cheap or near cheap. Literally, I was so cheap in those first days, I did like a 2-week free trial and finished up my mock-ups in those 2 weeks and rapidly prototyped and iterated and got feedback and got to the point where it was at least understandable. You push this button, it goes to this page. This is the basic functionality here. Typed up a Word document explaining it. I put it on Rent-A-Coder, and literally within a couple days had quotes from around the world of people saying, this is how long it will take me, this is how much it will cost. And these sites provide a ratings and review system. So you can start to filter out and say, hey, this person doesn't have enough experience. This person's only got 70% positive reviews. You start to get a range. Hey, because as a non-technical person, is this $1,000, $10,000? And so you start to get a range of like, okay, this is probably $5,000. That's too much. Let me strip out a couple bells and whistles. Okay, this is the, I always wanted to drive towards something I could build for under $2,000 and build in 1 month. Anything more than that was too many non-essential features. So I used Rent-A-Coder to build the first version of the website. I used 99 Designs, which is a similar platform but for design, to come up with the look and feel of the website and of the technology itself. There's also a site I'd recommend called Dribbble. You can also use Upwork for this. But through that combination of outsourcing, was able to build up my first version of the app, which was so valuable. I mean, when I was raising money, I got feedback that like, look, so many people, at the time, this is so long ago, the time so many people would come with an idea, but I was coming with something that investors could play with. They could touch, they could feel, they could see data, they could see how users were using it. It made the idea so much more real. And so I really like that route of rapid iteration and outsourcing. Just one thought, I'm very, very cheap. By the time I raised that $350,000, I had spent a total of about $9,000, which is nothing. I had one investor say that he had seen people spend, that I had done what he had given people 10 times more money to accomplish. So with $10,000, I had $100,000 worth of evidence. And I think that scrappiness showed him that I'd be a good steward of his money. So I think it's really important when you do this rapid iteration and outsourcing to really ruthlessly keep your costs low. Free trials. Don't pay for anything that's necessary. Don't worry that much about aesthetics. Don't waste money on a logo. Just really keep it scrappy. Another piece of advice is just a lot around self-doubt. I know in those early days, I really felt like a poser. I felt like I was wearing my dad's suit, with the sleeves too long and playing dress up and playing entrepreneur. I just felt like such a phony. And so one thing that I did do that I highly recommend, I spent $300 or $400 a month. Of that, as cheap as I was, I spent that money on an office, like a Regus office space. That helped. I felt like I had a real office. I was around other people. It made me feel a little bit more real, which in those early days, for me at least, was really difficult. Now entrepreneurship is a little bit more mainstream, Silicon Valley, all that stuff. But at the time, I would go to dinner parties and I would explain the idea and what I was working on. It was almost always the person would be like, oh, and they'd turn and talk to the other person. And there was this sense that like people just don't know what to do with you and your idea. That the funny thing is in A/B testing and comparing before and after fundraising, literally I would give the pitch. 90% of the time people would be like, it's a stupid idea or you're stupid for doing it. After fundraising, we had raised money from Eric Schmidt, the chairman of Google. After fundraising, I would say the exact same pitch and end it with, oh, and by the way, Eric Schmidt from Google invested in us. Oh, it's a brilliant idea. It's the best idea ever. It's just amazing, especially in early stage ideas. No one really has a great skill set to be able to filter through and see what's good or not. Even VCs hit the mark wrong so many times. So, but it's hard when you don't have any sort of validation for people to take you seriously, and they just kind of view you as someone who has like a lawn mowing business or something like that. Nothing against that sort of business, but when you're in high tech, it kind of just makes you feel like made me feel like a poser. One last thing is just fundraising advice. I just wanted to share some thoughts on this very quickly for those of you going down the startup path. So obviously the landscape has changed significantly since I raised money, but I wanted to just give a quick layout on what we mean with fundraising, some tips I've learned. So basic layout. When you first start, if you're doing it on your own dime like I was, that's called bootstrapping. Next stage from that is called friends and family, where you're getting friends and family to invest a little bit of money. A lot of investors like to see that. It shows you've got skin in the game, that you've got people that you don't want to piss off, people that believe in you. After that, there's angels. These are individuals usually who have lots of money and who like to invest. Often it's an emotional investment. They're wanting to help you as an entrepreneur. They're often entrepreneurs themselves, but they'll invest as an angel investor, which leads to venture capitalists. These are professional institutions that are investing money, usually larger. I would say that angels can kind of get you up to maybe $2 million-ish, and beyond that, it's venture capitalists. That's obviously changed as well, but that's just generics. And then from there, private equity, which is, they're investing in established companies at that point. And you can always go public as well, so the public markets. The seed round for me, I had a list of angel investors from Stanford. That was one big advantage from an MBA program, was I had other Stanford alumni that I knew invested in Stanford startups. And so I sent hundreds of emails to get those 40 to 60 meetings. And my experience was each meeting was very different. I had a basic pitch deck. I would go to these meetings. I would present. Some people hated aspects A and B of my business and loved aspects C and D. The next meeting I'd go to was the opposite. They loved C and D. They hated A and B. It was very inconsistent. One thing I loved about the best meetings I had, though, was I felt like I was sitting across the table from just another person that was investing their time and energy in my business, and I learned a lot that helped my business, even if the person didn't invest. My fundraising process was very iterative, where I would schedule a meeting, I would block off the next couple hours, I would rip apart my pitch deck, put it back together, try it out, same thing. It was like muscle building, that tearing and formation, just constantly. Every meeting changed my pitch presentation. The seed round, the feedback I got on why I was able to raise money, integrity directly from the military. A lot of people spoke about integrity, about discipline. Both of those, especially in retrospect, I think are very true. Just your ability to get up at 6 a.m. and work and push yourself without any structure, I think is so vital, and I think that's instilled from the military. I already shared about that 10,000 with what others did with 100,000, and then the third one was actions, not talk. Being able to have something demoable made the difference for me. Now, just to give you a sense, I was able to raise with a couple hundred users, maybe a couple $100 in revenue, very little. My sense is today, if I were raising again, I would have to show tens of thousands of dollars in revenue, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars in revenue. I think the landscape has shifted significantly, where because you can do more with less in today's startup environment, investors really, really expect to see more from your time and money. Let's see. I'm just looking. I had a couple notes of things I wanted to cover. So venture capital fundraising. That's when I raised my $2 million. I'd made a couple $100,000 in revenue. I was a team of 4 or 5 by that point. Seed investors definitely helped with a lot of intros, but it was a similar process for pitching. I had a list. Here's actually what I should have done. Here's some mistakes I made. So if I were encouraging any of you who are raising money, it's to start with a list of every single possible investor you can think of. Crunchbase is a great resource for this. Look at companies similar to you, see who invested in them. That'll expand to help you get off the radar, or people you might not know about. Angel list is something also to look at. It helps you widen your pool of investors. But create that list of every potential investor. Personal 2 cents, cross off every single one where you cannot get an intro. LinkedIn is great for this. You find those second-degree connections. I would spend days doing this. I'd find the investor I was looking for. I would find all the different people who worked there, see what my second-degree connections are. That's a friend of a friend. See if that person was strong enough for me to be able to ask for an intro. So cross off the ones you can't get an intro to. I think it's just nearly impossible to go through the front door for the majority of the cases. And then here's the critical piece that I messed up that I wish I hadn't. Prioritize this list on who you would really like to invest versus who you really don't care about. So let's say a list of 1 to 100, and the 100th one is the one that's like the worst investor. And this is the piece I messed up. Take the last 3 to 5 people, your least desirable investors, move them to the top, and start there. Because unlike the angel process, the VC pitch process for me, it was very similar. If an investor had a problem with market size, 9 out of 10 times the next investor would have the same feedback. These are professional investors. They have a great lens for looking at your business and really noticing the 2 or 3 things that will cause you to fail. And so it's important to get, I messed up those first meetings. I just didn't have good answers to questions that I should have. So get the kinks out on the ones that don't matter, because you may be able to get 1 meeting with a VC, but that's it. You're lucky if they'll meet with you again a year later. It's kind of like the bridges burns once you've met with them once. And then it was a very similar iterative approach. One thing I also wish I had done that I always advise entrepreneurs, if you are thinking of raising money in 6 months, go meet with an investor now. Grab coffee, do it as a friendly chat, and literally make your goal to find the 2 or 3 things that you need to show them in 6 months that will have them invest in you. The reason why I say this is I don't have that investor mindset. I don't know the 2 or 3 things that are critical for a business to succeed. But in meeting with someone who does have that skill set, you can take your list of 1,000 things that you need to do for your company and narrow it down to that laser focus of the 2 or 3 things that really matter. User retention, user growth. They're going to say, look, this is the thing I'm worried about, so I would need data showing that you can acquire customers for less than $1 a customer. great. He's just simplified what you really need to focus on for the next 6 months. So that's one piece of advice I give as well. In general, investors, my experience is they will ask for 20 to 30% of your company per round, just something to know. And I also wish I'd taken money off the table when I first raised money. My lawyer had advised me when I raised that $2 million, he'd said, take $100,000 off, just kind of, de-risk yourself a little bit. And I was so 100% invested. I didn't want to give up any equity. It was good advice. It would have helped me pay off some bills. It would have taken off some financial pressure. And that's something I would recommend for entrepreneurs as well. The one last thing is I had a couple different term sheets for my VC round. That's when term sheets, when an investor's thinking of investing, they put it in writing. And the only way from my experience to get better terms is to have an alternative. Having 2 term sheets really helped me to get better terms for the company. And so obviously the more options you have, the better. Worst moment of the startup life, I always ask guests about worst moment. The first time we shrunk. It was 18 people. We had such a dysfunctional team. I was a very ineffective manager. There were some glaring flaws in our business model that I was not willing to be honest about. I just was not honest with myself. I was so fixated on video. I missed a major pivot that we eventually made to include photos that I was about a year and a half late on. And so lots of different problems with the business model. We were hemorrhaging money. I was not being honest with myself about that as well. And so got to the point where several key team members quit, and I had to lay off a lot. And it was very, very painful. It felt like the world was falling down around me. And a lot of the advice I'm going to get into around mental tenacity, I think, is so important, because for me at that moment, my identity was so invariably fixed to the outcome of my startup. And no matter how good you are, and I was not even good at the time, I'm still getting good, there's so much luck involved in this game. And so to have your identity and self-worth tied to something that's so out of your control is just not fair. And so I just was in the gutter. It just felt like the end of the world. And since then, having several times come to that cliff of failure and thinking it's about to end, I think I've built up a little bit more stability and equanimity around that I didn't have initially. But that was very, that felt like the world was collapsing. And one thing I'll say is that I've been through this many times. Every time I've had to shrink the team, every time we've gotten smaller, we've gotten leaner, more efficient, and stronger. Just like building muscle, it's like trimming down and like forcing to build better habits. So know if you go through that, know that you're going to come out the other side stronger. A friend of mine had said, you wouldn't want to be helicoptered to the top of Mount Everest. And that's so true. I know, every piece of this business I have earned, everything that we've gotten, I have fought for. And that gives me a tremendous sense of accomplishment, knowing that I've built this. Conversely, the best moment was about a year and a half ago. Just started to improve as a manager and met with my team and just talked with them about my goal to really invest in them. That my goal was to know that, in the moment I had this football, in the moment I had the spotlight and had the opportunity to make a difference, I did that by doing my utmost to develop them fully to their professional and personal best. And so started working out together, meditation training together. I'd bring in different people to help us and build us. And it was just such a fun time, the proudest moment I've had in the company, and such a great team, having gone through several iterations of hiring, finally learning how to hire the right people that would complement my unique dysfunctions and skills, which I think takes time and honesty to do as well. So that was definitely one of the best moments. A couple random lessons before I just move on past the startup piece. A couple things I would share is that everything I have done with startups has taken 10 times longer and has taken 10 times more money than I expected. Every single thing. Nothing has been easy. When you are making a list of things you're going to do for your startup, know that every single thing on your list will be 10 times harder, it will take 10 times more money, and probably 10 times more time. And so that's where a lot of people flounder, as they run out of money or they run out of stamina. That led to a personal mantra in my first 2 or 3 years, which was, if this was easy, everyone would do it. The advantages of running your own company, the advantages of doing something you really believe in are so extreme. And if it was simple, I'm convinced that almost everyone would do it. But it is tremendously difficult, at least my experience has been. Another one, TechCrunch, don't read it. I don't know what the modern one is now, but Facebook, get off it. For me, one of the Achilles heels in the startup journey has been this comparative mind. Looking at other startups that are doing better than I was, looking at other companies that were growing faster, that were getting more publicity. And for me, it was really gut-wrenching to see that. And I would notice that my energy would always drop whenever I read about the latest startup to raise money, and just think, oh, what am I doing? So cut that stuff out, and you'll get that news, the essential pieces, elsewhere. But Facebook, TechCrunch, all those things, for me at least, were much more dispiriting. They did not add value, and they did not bring out the positive, enduring assets that I want to cultivate in my startup. They just made me much more apathetic. Highs and lows, I'm going to talk about this at the very end. My journey with startups has been extreme highs, extreme lows. I credit my wife, Rebecca, exclusively on this. Not exclusively, but the lion's share for when she came into my life, bringing stability, getting me exercising, eating healthy, financial responsibility. My life was so out of whack, so off kilter before I met her. And so I highly encourage you to read that essay. I'll put it in the show notes. It's called Life Underwater. But the need to find value in yourself beyond the outcome of your startup. Realizing that we are surrounded by a world of delusion that says that if you get the right idea, you will get everything you want. Some of the most successful people I know are the least satisfied. And so to put off everything with the hope that your startup will succeed and you will be happy and you'll get everything you want, it is delusional, and it is a pervasive and destructive mindset right now. And then lastly, realizing you cannot control the outcome of your company. I cannot control the outcome of StoryBox. I can control my actions. And one of the things that's led to a lot more fulfillment in work, and a lot of this goes along with that book, Deep Work, but focusing on your actions, focusing on your personal and professional growth, focusing on what I can control. And that will lead to higher outcome rates, but it also leads to a lot more learning and growing and sucking the value out of every experience. And then very lastly, there are a lot of entrepreneur vehicles. Very few of them get attention. Venture capital funded startups is the primary one that gets attention right now, but there are search funds, there are running lifestyle companies, there are building grassroots, bootstrapped company ideas that never raise money. I'll talk about this in the resources sections, but learn about these vehicles. The VC model is shooting for the stars, 1 in a billion chance, and you become a billionaire. And that's got all of popular media's attention now. But there's a lot of great ways to build companies of value that aren't that. And I would encourage you to look at that if you're interested in entrepreneurship. All right. How is everyone doing? It feels so weird just sitting here alone talking to this microphone, but we're going to go on. Okay, so taking longer than I want, so I want to move things along. Beyond the uniform, where this came from. I was at a dinner party down in San Diego with a guy named Chris Starr and Heather Starr, a bunch of their friends. It was Heather's birthday. A bunch of their friends were in the military. Chris is on active duty. They were just complaining about not knowing what to do if they were to get out of the military, and that really brought back my thoughts on submarines, of having no clue what I was going to do, and my thoughts in business school of having to learn from classmates. And so thought for a long time about how to do this. And I was at an airport in Portland when the idea struck me, where I really liked Tim Ferriss's podcast and thought, look, here's a way where I can learn from others. I don't have to spend hundreds of hours of my own time coming up with content. And there's a potential way to make money to offset the costs where I won't have to charge veterans. It was very important to me that whatever I did was completely free for veterans. Did not want to have to charge them or monetize through them. So why I do this partly is giving back to a community. I learned a lot from the military. I earned a lot from the military, and wanting to give back. Second, just the creativity that spills over. In doing this podcast, I've learned so much. It definitely lights up a lot of my creativity that benefits me in StoryBox. And then I guess lastly is, I obviously love meeting people. I love that aspect. What was I going to say? I thought there was a third reason, but I'm blanking on that now. Since I left the Navy and in business school and for the couple years after that, I was pretty distant from the military community. And so this was a way to re-engage with that part of myself that I wanted to give more room to. In terms of how I do this right now, so it costs about $100 a month to put this show together, hosting websites, stuff like that. There is a lot more I'd love to do, transcripts, doing more shows, editing help, just so I can focus on the actual interviews. But for right now, I'm doing all this myself just to wait for it to grow. Never want to charge vets. There's an appeal around sponsorship models. Right now through Audible, I make about $15 every time someone signs up. It's not nearly enough to cover the cost of the show, but it's a start. Let's see. I guess challenges with Beyond the Uniform. One is making time. It's really hard to carve out time right now. StoryBox takes up a lot of my time. So I'm trying to carve out at least a week, an hour a week to do this, which that is even difficult at times. So that's one challenge. A second is a lot of people reach out either wanting to be interviewed or wanting someone else to be interviewed. So it's difficult to not feel like a jerk by saying no. And I mean, at this point, there's like a list of 50 people. And so I always appreciate that. And there have been ones where I've just definitely bumped up on the list, but that's a challenge. There is still a lot of uncertainty around how to best serve the military community, which of these interviews are most helpful, and so there's a lot of ambiguity here. And then there's also my own personal interest, which is obviously on the startup side or people where I'm learning from. And then there's some people that I know would benefit, especially people on active duty, where it's maybe talking about initial job search or getting into college where I don't learn as much, so it's harder for me to really devote that hour to that, even though that will probably benefit the community. So I'm still finding that balance. In terms of where this goes, I plan on doing this as long as the meetings keep coming up and as long as it scratches my personal itch. I have loved doing these first 100 interviews. Cannot believe they've already up to 100, but looking forward to the next 100. So last piece is resources. I think this is like the most underused portion of the show when I ask people about this because I have a lot to say on this. So bear with me as I get on my soapbox and just share websites, books, podcasts, and life things that I would highly recommend to any veteran, especially those pursuing entrepreneurship, but pretty much everyone. So websites, TechCrunch, Pando Daily. If you're thinking of getting into startups, it's a good way to see what people are doing, but it does trigger a lot of comparisons, so I don't recommend it once you're in a startup. There is a great sales course called Grant Cardone University. I've done 7 or 8 years of sales. I've sold millions of dollars to Fortune 500 companies, and I am learning a ton by watching these short 3 to 5 minute videos on how to improve sales. So Grant Cardone University, if you're going into the sales area. There is a site called, I'll put the link in there. I think it's Hacker News. No, it's, you know what? I'm going to look this up before I forget, but it's really, really good site. So this site covers, let's see here. IndieHacker.com, best site. So why I love this, it's geared towards developers. So just take it with a grain of salt where a lot of these people are engineers working on business ideas, but they are very transparent about making $10,000 a month, $5,000, $2,000 a month off of ideas you would never think would generate money. Why I love this site is they talk about how they do it. It's a great source if you're thinking of entrepreneurship to go and just get a sense of like all the crazy ideas that make money and how you might find one of those ideas yourself. Books. I love to read, so here's a bunch of these. If you do get these books, please buy it from my site or get the Audible one to help support the show through the commission there. Big Magic. So the lady, Elizabeth Gilbert, that wrote Eat, Pray, Love, which I have not read, she wrote this book. I highly recommend this on audiobook. It is the only audiobook I've listened to more than once. She's got a great voice and narration style. But Big Magic is all about living a creative life. Artist, entrepreneur, whatever you do, if it involves creativity, she has so much great advice about how to foster creativity, how to live a creative life. I find it really inspiring, and I think about the book more than anything else in entrepreneurship. There's a book called Helping that is great. It's like 136 pages. It should be exactly 136 pages. It's very succinctly written. It's all about coaching, helping others. I think as a leader, it's a great book. 2 books that I featured on the show. I encourage you to listen to those episodes if you haven't already. I'll link to those in the show notes. So Good They Can't Ignore You, about how Follow Your Passion is BS advice, and Deep Work, about really, really increasing your productivity. Both those books were, for me, professionally life-changing. In terms of motivation, I love to read biographies. Tony Robbins, who I'll talk about in a little bit, he talks about the importance of getting your brain used to thinking in different ways. And he talks about how biographies are a way to put yourself inside the heads of great people who have done great things. I listen to these when I'm running primarily, and it's very, very motivational. 3 books I'd recommend: Shoe Dog, about Phil Knight, about the story of Nike. Very, very inspirational for me. Elon Musk's biography. The guy is incredible, and seeing what he's gone through. I'm picturing right now that scene in Shawshank Redemption when Dufresne climbs through that cesspipe through hundreds of yards of just garbage and crap into freedom. That's what I picture when I think of Elon Musk, what that man has endured to build 2 of the most amazing companies around right now. And then the Everything Store about Jeff Bezos with Amazon. All 3 of those books, it's just really helpful to see their mindset, see how they think, see what they've done. Lastly, I'm just going to throw this out on a whim. Science fiction, fantasy, if you're ever into that: Pandora's Star, Hyperion, Mistborn, historical fiction, Shogun. 4 of my favorite books. They'll change your life. Podcasts. How I Built This is my favorite podcast, weekly podcast that's about creativity, startups, entrepreneurship. This week's was about Tom's Shoes. Last week was they have like the founder of Atari and Chuck E. Cheese, same guy, Kendra Scott. He has incredible guests. He is an incredible interviewer, and I just find that show is just inspiring to see what these people have gone through to build companies. I think it's just a great podcast, How I Built This. Tim Ferriss, that's the podcast off of which I based mine. Tim Ferriss interviews world-class performers, athletes, politicians, and tries to deconstruct what makes them successful. It is one of the best podcasts out there. I go in and out of love with it. The first 7 minutes are ads, which is really frustrating. And I find that at times it really triggers in me a competitiveness that's not helpful for the business. And so I go through patches of binging on that and then getting overdosed on it. But Tim Ferriss is worth checking out. Tony Robbins, great for motivation and for mindset. We'll talk about him in a little bit too, but his podcast is pretty good. And then 2 other ones that I don't listen to, but I think anyone interested in entrepreneurship should: the Smart Passive Income podcast and Entrepreneur on Fire. Both of those, Smart Passive Income podcast and EO Fire, both feature a lot of stories of entrepreneurs and a lot of great practical tips for those of you who are thinking about entrepreneurship. Lastly, life. I feel a little self-conscious talking about this because who am I to give advice? But it's my interview, and you can always turn it off. But I think I have a lot to share on this. Why I think this is so important. Especially from business school, I know people, and from outside of that, who have made millions and hundreds of millions of dollars. And a lot of the times, these people are not fulfilled and they are not satisfied, or they've had to sacrifice marriages, relationships to children, or other things to get there. And in those vulnerable conversations, when you learn that, Tony Robbins talks about there is the science of achievement and the art of fulfillment. And I feel like so many of us, myself included, focus everything on that science of achievement, of how to succeed, especially in our professional lives. And that will often come at the exclusion of that art of fulfillment, of leading a life that you find meaningful, of having the emotional stability so that you can be tenacious in your startup, that you can weather those storms. Another great quote from Tony Robbins, he talks about how entrepreneurship is 80% psychology and 20% skills. And that has been my experience as well. The times that I've been tripped up in business has not always been around skill set. Almost always it's because something is screwing with my head and I'm not thinking about something correctly, or I'm not operating at my peak because I'm letting something get in the way of me and peak performance. And so I think the psychology piece is so essential. So here are a couple things. that I would recommend to any listener, regardless if you do entrepreneurship or not. The first is meditation. The reason why, if you listen to like Tim Ferriss, every one of these world-class performers meditates. There is so much evidence about the impact this has on your attention, focus, equanimity, ability to weather storms, but it's just all about being present. For me, this is about uncovering the automatic responses where I'm just reacting without even realizing that knee-jerk reaction that I do for most of my life, rather than paying attention, recognizing when there's some sort of stimulus so that I can hopefully choose my response and ideally choose a response that's more skillful. There are so many scientific benefits. There's a great book called The Happiness Advantage and The Search For. There's a book, just type Google meditation. There's a book that's like the Search for Happiness, I think, about Google's meditation program. All of these are great resources. My gateway to meditation that I would recommend, there's a course called Mindfulness-Based Stress Reduction. A very good course offered at almost every college, I did it at UCSF's college campus. But mindfulness-based stress reduction, it's an 8 or 10 week program. It's very good at teaching you, a lot of different strategies for using meditation. And you'll even do like a full day meditation, which will be, I think, transformative for you. Insight Timer is a free app, hundreds of guided meditations on there. I know a lot of people also like Headspace. On meditation, I've done about 30 days in silent meditation retreats, which is, for between 5 to 10 days, I'll go. You don't speak pretty much for 10 days. You just meditate all day. It's just all guided. So you'll do 30 minutes of like seated meditation, 30 minutes of walking, alternating throughout the day, eating in silence. And it is the most rejuvenating thing I have ever done. I mean, just picture not checking your email for 10 days, not seeing the news for 10 days, not seeing your phone for 10 days. It has so many benefits. For me, it's been about slowing down, observing what's going on, just noticing so much about myself, getting that mental clutter and noise that builds up invariably over time, getting that to quiet down and get that laser-like focus. So I'd encourage you to check out those meditation retreats as well. Second, coaching. Coaching is huge. I meet with a business coach once a week for half an hour. In 30 minutes, it is unreal what business challenges I can overcome. Just incredible movement on problems and things that I can't think my way around. If you're interested in this, email me. My wife does a lot of coaching. She can connect you with people. They should give you a discount because you're a veteran. You should get a discount for everything because you're a veteran. Pricing can range anywhere from $20 to $500 for a session. The person I work with, it's like $500 for 3 30-minute sessions, just to give you kind of a context. But many people are much cheaper. But I highly recommend coaching for whatever you do. It's just a way, it's like literally a coach who's pushing you, challenging you, calling you out on your BS. If you are training for a marathon and you want to perform and be the best, you get a coach. It's no different in your professional career. Coaching, I think, is great. Coaching is also a gateway into the third one, which is therapy, which a lot of people don't talk about nearly enough. Cognitive behavioral therapy, somatic therapy. This is all about going inside, figuring out the little speed bumps that are getting in the way of yourself succeeding. I've seen a therapist on or off for the last 4 or 5 years. It has been incredible. It has been very, very helpful about work and just about personal life, about uncovering so much about myself that I didn't even realize. And at the end of the day, it makes me more fulfilled. It makes me more productive. It makes me much more effective. It's like sharpening a knife. So I'd highly recommend any veteran checking out some form of therapy. The last ones are around seminars. And why I love these is it is such a great way to get a deep dose of knowledge, self-knowledge, professional knowledge, whatever you go to a conference for. It's a very efficient way to learn. So I'm going to give you 3 different conference ideas or seminar ideas to spark your ideas, your mind. The first is something called Landmark, and I have several very big caveats with this. But Landmark is a 3-day seminar, Friday, all day Saturday, all day Sunday, and I mean like 9 a.m. till 11 p.m. Very, very long, but the reason I like Landmark is it's like, in one weekend, it's maybe $600. It's like the equivalent of getting 50 hours of therapy. It's very good about uncovering core beliefs, about uncovering different things that shape the way that you approach problem solving, that shape the way you approach relationships, that shape the way that you approach life in general. So I think that Landmark is a good gateway, entryway for those of you who are interested in checking out a seminar. The caveats are they are very salesy. I would say that 20% of their content is about getting you to take another Landmark course or getting you to take or to invite someone you know to it. So I think go in with the knowledge that it's going to be salesy. And I think for all of these conferences, I would also give the caveat of go in and play full out. They do weird stuff you might not be familiar with, stuff that feels uncomfortable. They're talking about things that you might not have talked about before, and it can feel outside of your comfort zone. But if you've listened to that Jacob Martinez interview, which I highly recommend, he talked about how all of our growth comes when we're out of our comfort zone. All of our growth comes when we're not exactly comfortable, when we're at the edge of what we find comfortable. And so go to these conferences, play full out. At the end of it, if you disagree, great, throw it away. But just go in with an open mind, go in with the attitude of getting everything you can out of it, and I guarantee you it'll be life-changing. The next one is Tony Robbins, which if you've seen the Netflix documentary, I Am Not Your Guru, if you haven't, checked that out. I've been to a couple of his events now. One is called Unleash the Power Within, which I have very mixed feelings about. I thought it was good, but I didn't like it that much. Date with Destiny, which is 1 week in Florida. It's very intense. 1 week, I would say it's one of the most powerful things I've ever done in my life. They fill up about 6 months ahead of time, so highly encourage you to check that out. But I also did a business mastery course, which Jacob Martinez talked about in his podcast. Great if you run or are a senior in a company. Really, really helpful. I would say that Tony Robbins is the most effective teacher I've ever seen. He is incredible at synthesizing a massive amount of information, teaching it to you in a way that you retain it, getting you fired up, helping you uncover the different mental things that hold you back. But if you listen to his interview on Tim Ferriss, I think you'll get a very small taste of what he's like. It is very powerful. I put it after Landmark just because it's a little bit more, I think it's going to be a little bit more out of people's comfort zone, but I think that he is the gold standard in this for just really pushing yourself. And then lastly is something that's called nonviolent communication, which is an awful name for it, but it's basically about building empathy. It's about identifying the feelings and needs that we have. The premise is that each of us have vastly different experiences, but we all have a core set of feelings that are attempts to meet needs that we have. And if we can identify those feelings and those needs, we can understand each other more, communicate more effectively, and better meet our needs. An example, like this a year or so ago, I came home from work just wiped, right? And I, was very snippy with my wife, Rebecca, and we started to use nonviolent communication. And what we realized is that she had a need for connection with me and for, just that feeling of love between us, of just really bonding. And for me, I just coming home from work, I had a need for autonomy. I wanted to be able to have some choice in what I was doing. And I had a need for freedom of just getting out of the house and not feeling cooped up. And so once we identified those needs, we're actually able to find a strategy that met both needs. I got to choose a bar and we went out and grabbed a drink and I was outside, I had that autonomy and she had that connection. So it's pretty amazing. I know I'm not doing this justice in what I'm talking about, but it's really unbelievable in a work setting and in a personal setting that once you start to be able to find the needs behind what someone is asking for or what they need, you can find strategies to meet those needs, whether that's in a sales context, a dating context, friendship, families. It's a very, very powerful skill set. And so they do have these trainings. You can probably find videos on YouTube. Again, this will be out of a lot of people's comfort zone, but it is such a valuable skill, and I would encourage people to check out nonviolent communication. So that is it. I got to go cook dinner. It's Memorial Day right now. I hope you guys are enjoying the day off. I know this is longer than normal, but was excited to share my story with you. Very energizing to do that. Glad I did, and looking forward to having more great episodes with you. Thanks again for your support, and I will see you next week.